Hello, everybody, and welcome back to This Week in Privacy, our weekly series where we cover the latest updates with what we've been working on in the Privacy Guides community. And this week's top stories in the data privacy and cybersecurity space. Privacy Guides is a non-profit which researches and shares privacy-related information and facilitates a community on our forum and matrix, where people can ask questions and get advice about staying private online and preserving their digital rights. But before we dive into this week's show, here's a rundown of what we'll be covering this week. Firstly, we'll start by covering site updates. Then we'll discuss the top stories in data privacy and cybersecurity. Next, we'll cover some trending posts on the Privacy Guides forum. And finally, we'll answer viewer questions. So if you do have a question for us, please leave a comment in the forum thread or the YouTube chat. But with that being said, let's start off this week with site updates. And this week, I am here with Kevin, our community and news intern. So how are you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing good. Hope everyone's doing well despite the recent news that's been popping up across the world, and hope everyone's staying safe. Um, First off, like to go over the recent change laws released around 19 hours ago. So, firstly, the user by name of Redoomed1 has added Valida to our search engine's page. Secondly, Apple Health has been replaced with Apple Fitness for fitness tracking by Dev. Thirdly, we added a self-hosting DNS page and moved Vault Warden to self-hosting index, also by Redoomed. Fourthly, PureCrypt has finally been removed and it's been added by Dev. And finally, Zimbals are included in releases by Jonah. All in all, though, like the rest of the changes we noticed right here are just recent articles and minor changes and bug fixes. If you'd like to look into that, please go over to our official change log. We will send over very soon. Anyways, we'd like to quickly go over some exciting developments. As may or may not have gone in your email, we are finally restarting our newsletter. Jonah and I, we co-wrote this yesterday and hope you had a fun read. We mostly mentioned the recent news with chat control, shout out a few of M's articles and Jordan's past videos, and all in all, gave you a brief rundown of last week's stream if you missed it. If you're interested in learning more, feel free to contact us in the forum and we'll get you started on the newsletter. And we'd like to go over, of course, on any recent articles that have been published. M has released an amazing article about chat control in light of today's recent deadline to contact your local European representatives. As you may or may not have known, chat control is a repetitive issue forced down by the European Parliament and Council over and over again. It has been constantly shut down. The latest iteration is incredibly dangerous, and M has written a call to action in her latest article. If hopefully you have already contacted your European representatives, but if you haven't, it seems like some form of voting, a veto minority has been reached by Luxembourg and Germany as the latest additions. However, it's still not too late for you to inform yourself about this issue and learn more about chat control in the next coming weeks. Of course, we don't really know. There hasn't been any official vote yet. Therefore, I highly recommend that you still learn about the resources you need to stop chat control and never the situation changes or if this ever gets proposed in the future. Anyways, I'd like to pass this on to Jordan to announce the current videos that they're working on.
Awesome, thanks. That was a great overview of everything we've been working on this week here at Privacy Guides. And also, as Kevin said, I've been working on a video this week, and it's kind of been a video that's been in the works for quite a while, and we had a video about browser fingerprinting that came out, and that was sort of a video interview with Rui from Mulvad Browser. And I think if you're kind of on the fence about like using a fingerprint resistant browser, or you want to at least have a better understanding of the topic, I highly recommend you check out the video because I think it's definitely a good introduction to the topic, we also are planning to do a more in-depth article at some point about the topic, because it is just such a complex topic, and it seems like there is quite a bit of misinformation about it, and we kind of want to put out some high quality stuff so people can get reliable information about it, especially when it's quite a concern these days, because it's becoming much more prevalent. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely check out the forum thread, or you can find the video on PeerTube and YouTube as well. And with that being said, that's basically all the site updates this week. I guess we should move into the news section. So I'll hand it back to Kevin to get us started on this week's top story.
Now, I feel like we've been quite overwhelmed with so many new beta releases of so far unfinished products. But this week is actually quite exciting. Firstly, like start with the Tor Project's recent app, currently also in beta, called Tor VPN. Now, it's not necessarily a traditional VPN service as you might expect, something like Molvad or Proton. And then if you're familiar with Orbot, it's actually quite similar to that, but differs in a lot of clear ways. If we look at the article here, we see that this app is released for Android and essentially allows you to route everything on your Android phone through the Tor network. And first spotted by this journalist by the name of Caitlin Chimpanu, this beta is currently available in the Google Play Store and is explicitly labeled as experimental. And it has been warned by the Tor project that you should not rely on it for anything that's sensitive, as it may still leak identifying information. Now, this isn't saying that it will leak identifying information. It's just an imperfect project and could have the potential to do so. And if you do use this software, please notify the Tor project of any bugs or potential improvements, of course. This is, after all, meant for testing. And as you noticed in the official GitLab project repository, they've been working for quite some time, since January 2022, and has undergone like over 600 commits. Now, what differs itself from something like Orbot, which has been developed by the Guardian project, was that it's built on RT, which is Tor's recent and modern Rust-based implementation of the Tor protocol. So it's more memory safe and theoretically could be seen as an improvement over the functionality of Orbot, which also uses a VPN as a backend for its ability to route everything through its server. Anyhow, it offers a lot of similar services, such as IP and location obfuscation, censorship persistence, per app routing, and of course, onion server support. Of course, there has been not a lot of information available so far. Most of the conversation on the topic on the forum currently revolves around trying to gain access to that in the first place. I believe for a brief moment, or maybe still now, it has been closed for downloads. However, people haven't found circumventions to download directly from the Tor Project website. But we do not necessarily recommend that you do this as of now. We highly recommend that you wait for any feedback, wait for this project to mature a bit and see, hey, does TorVPN have potential to actually give you a potential improvement over Orbot? Anyways, I'd like to pass this on to Jordan for any comments that they may have.
Yeah, I think like the biggest thing here for me at least is, oh my goodness, the app actually looks beautiful. Like, I think one of the things that kind of bothered me about the Orbot app was that it was a little bit, I don't know, it was a little bit ugly looking. And this new like Tor VPN app, it looks like quite beautiful. And I think making something like have an easy, intuitive interface is pretty important. And at least in my testing, I haven't had any issues with the app. I've just been using it for testing stuff, and it has had no problems for me in particular. And all the different routing options within the app also work. So I think it's definitely an interesting direction for the Tor project to choose to have their own like app instead of relying on the Guardian project to make the Orbot app. But I think one of the big things that that Kevin mentioned about the app was that it had a per app routing where each app gets its own Tor circuit and exit IP. which I think is kind of huge. As far as I'm aware, that's not something that's available in Orbot, so it is pretty cool that it can do that, which does offer like another layer of protection. I feel like it definitely integrates better with your operating system with Android. Unfortunately, I don't really see how this could be available on iOS, which is kind of an issue. Um, so I think, I would like to see an iOS app because we do have Orbot on the iOS side of things. But if you've ever tried that app, it doesn't work so well. So, I mean, I would like to see an iOS version of the Tor VPN. Whether it will be able to do the same things that the Android app can do, probably not. So, I mean, this is definitely an interesting project. I definitely wouldn't trust it with anything like sensitive or anything. But if you just want to give it a shot and try it out, then I mean, definitely go ahead and give it a shot. Did you have anything that you thought was interesting about the app, Kevin?
I think as someone who hasn't used Orbot for quite some time, it's been a few years. I can't really comment on whether the user experience is better or not. But what I can say, however, is that you should probably not use your Android phone as your primary device for Tor. Please have a laptop and ideally use one of our recommended operating systems, of course. But if you feel like this would be a good supplement and to your current OPSEC plan, then definitely do consider giving this app a shot and test it around, for fun, of course. However, though, I definitely do agree with Jordan with that. It's a gorgeous app, and it seems a lot more intuitive than whatever Orbot had back in the day. Was it like an onion or something? It was a literal onion on your screen, and you click on it to connect to Tor. And I remember looking at it when I was testing it, I was like, fascinating. A literal onion on your screen. I didn't obviously I think though, but Tor VPN is definitely a good step forward. I do anticipate that in the future we're going to need to explain to folks that no, Tor VPN isn't a traditional VPN service. It's just using VPN as a way for you to route everything through Tor. But just keep that in mind before you get confused over the naming system that they have.
Yeah, I think it's mainly called Tor VPN probably just to appeal to more people because I feel like if you look up Tor on the App Store, it doesn't come up with the Tor browser or anything related to it. It just comes up with a bunch of scam apps. So I think Orbot, you probably wouldn't assume that that's even related to the Tor project, which is an interesting idea. I don't know why they decided to go with the name Orbot, but I'm sure there's some specific reason. But I think calling it Tor VPN kind of describes better what it does. It is technically going to access the VPN slot on your device. So, I mean, kind of makes sense to call it that. But yeah, it's definitely not the same as an actual VPN because it's doing 3 hops to get you to your internet destination. So it's definitely going to be a lot slower and, it's not recommended for everyday usage, but I think people in a very specific use case, like someone whose internet is censored or restricted, definitely this could help. But obviously, you have to be very careful with using these sort of tools. If where you live it's not allowed to be used or it can be detected and you might face repercussions, definitely be careful with that. But it's definitely an interesting app and I'm definitely looking forward to this stable release.
Indeed, indeed. One final thing I'll add before we move on to the next article. Um, since it does use your VPN slot on your Android device, if you're ever in a situation where you need to hide your um, Tor connection, you should definitely use not only the built-in bridges, but for some reason you can't access a bridge or it doesn't work for you, you can also just use a VPN on your router itself. And if you need any assistance with doing that, there's a lot of folks on the forum willing to help you out, as well as any existing articles we may have. And we'd like to pass on to Jordan for the next article.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get started with the next article here, and it's definitely one that I've seen a lot of people discussing this week, and that is Signal introducing secure backups. So I've got a little summary here that I'll read out. Signal has launched in Android beta an opt-in feature allowing end-to-end encrypted daily backups of chats and up to 45 days of media, which they have a paid tier for US $1.99 a month, which extends storage. And it uses a device-generated recovery key, which is never shared with Signal to ensure privacy, with plans for iOS and desktop support soon. However, this feature only supports Google Drive, with no option for local backup or an alternative service like Proton Drive. So I think like the thing that I've seen going around about this is that this is a good addition. Obviously, we want to have more features and the ability to have everything backed up, because a lot of people, reset their phone, might accidentally reset their phone, might accidentally lose their phone, and they might have like messages in there that they are sentimental about, I would say, and having that being lost is kind of a bit of an issue. But did you have anything you thought about this app, Kevin? About this change?
Yes. I would say for sure that signal backups are a welcome feature for it to for like compete realistically with WhatsApp or iMessage. As you may know, backups are a huge concern if you ever doing something sensitive with your messenger. I believe there are instances where people have been caught. For example, having a backup in an unencrypted cloud solution. For example, having WhatsApp message where everything is already end-to-end encrypted, but having an unencrypted backup within your iCloud Drive. That's potentially a huge concern. And knowing that Signal has finally implemented a solution for that, at least for the specific encrypted backups itself, is frankly quite rewarding. Um, Usually the advice is find a good, secure, encrypted cloud provider like Proton Drive, or maybe enable advanced data protection on your iCloud Drive to solve this problem. But now that Signal has directly ensured that there's secure backups, that could be the case if for some reason you really do need to use something like Google Drive for work, for example. Um, so this has been a good first step for many folks who may be hesitant to switch to Signal. But I'm also excited to hear your other comments on this, Jordan.
Just a correction there. I said it was updated to Google Drive. I'm not sure where that came from. That was in like the summary here. But it doesn't, it just backs up directly to Signal. So just a correction there. Uh, I think the issue that a lot of people are having with this, that I saw when I was reading through like the discussion post that was linked by Signal. Basically, they have their own like feedback forum where people can leave thoughts on like beta changes. And a lot of people were saying they wish that there was a way to get this subscription without having a Google Play Services device. And I think that's kind of the issue for a lot of people in our community who use, Graphene OS devices or, other custom operating systems like Calyx or Lineage OS, where they don't have Google Play services and they also want to be able to have this feature and get all their media backed up to Signal. It's not available. It's only available through, at least now, this is for Android only, this beta. So obviously when it comes to like iOS, there'll be no other way to do it probably because of Apple's like lockdown ecosystem. But on Android, there's no way to get this subscription without having Google Play services installed. So there was some discussion over there and there was people asking questions, why isn't this supported? And currently the answer that they were giving was it's technically not a donation because you're like paying for a service, right? So like they can't do the same system that they use for like donations through the app because you can make donations without Google Play services in the app. But you can't get the subscription, which is kind of a bit of a bummer. So I think that's probably one of the big issues that I saw people talking about. And personally, I don't know if this is not for me. This feature is not for me, but I mean, there's definitely people that this could be very useful for. And if you need this, then I would say that it's an option now, at least on the beta. So it'll probably coming to stable relatively soon. So definitely look out for that when it comes out. But is there anything else that you noticed, Kevin?
I guess my question would be, would it work on a custom ROM like Graphene OS, specifically since the recommended configuration is to use Sandbox Google Play if that fits your threat model. Um, but I haven't really tested that myself. But I'm really looking forward to see how other people have used it and seeing, hey, is this a potential solution that fits your needs? On
Yeah.
that note, I would love to move on to the next article, which is about a very concerning trend we're seeing in 2024. Um, According to the Atlantic Council's report, US based investors in spyware companies rose from 11 in 2023 to 31 in 2024. The US now leads in backing spyware firms, followed by Israel and Italy, amid a growing complex global spyware ecosystem involving resellers and brokers. Now, if we were to read through this article, we notice that, for starters, it doesn't necessarily mean that the US is backing these spyware firms. It's more so there's a lot of growing interest in investing in these companies, which I think is a lot more dangerous than you think it is. Having private equity or venture capital firms fundraising and investing into these companies is frankly quite dangerous, and it rewards these startups from creating more of these services. Um, I think, like, just from my personal like research, like there has been quite a lot of instances where spyware is suddenly being normalized by law enforcement agencies across the world, be it in the U.S., obviously Israel, but also Italy as well. Um, and if you ever do notice like this growing trend in the news where spyware is suddenly not just a very rare thing, but commonly utilized by law enforcement agencies, I think it's perfectly valid to be worried about this trend. I think in the forum I mentioned something about a potential list or of firms that invest in these companies, and I think that would be a fascinating project to work on in the future. If you ever do want to, for example, divest from any like venture capital firms or private equity firms that do in fact invest in these spyware firms.
Yeah, I think this is definitely kind of a bit of a alarming article, I would say, just reading the title of it. And I wonder like what the connection is. Why is there such a booming um uh investment in spyware firms? Would you be able to offer uh any thoughts on that, Kevin? Because I'm not super familiar with like US based ideas here.
I'm not familiar with the investment firms in question. Usually, what happens is that hedge funds they tend to invest in a variety of companies, not just one. So it could have not been a necessarily an intentional design um, or intentional plan by these companies. Maybe with growing at like outrage, perhaps there will be some divestiture. Um, However, if I'm going to like postulate why this could be the case, it could be entirely true that there is a growing market and demand for this. I think over the past few news stories I noticed involving federal law enforcement agencies, at least in America, such as ICE, is that there has been growing utilization of contracts between Paragon, which is a very infamous spyware firm, and ICE to essentially like partner together and essentially have an exclusive use of Paragon for its any law enforcement needs. And regardless of your political affiliation or beliefs, I think we all care about methods here. Um, Targeted spyware is incredibly invasive and should not be used at all. Um, and you should be worried that explicit government approval and usage of mercenary spyware software should not be allowed. Therefore, like there's obviously a growing market for it, and so that's why I believe there's so much like investments going on so far.
I see. So that is interesting. I guess, yeah, especially if it's being used, I think any spyware shouldn't be really. used against people. That's not really great for people's privacy because in a lot of cases, this sort of spyware that we're talking about here, would this be like, like Pegasus and like all these sort of like 0 day sort of things that people are using to like hack people's devices? Because they said in this thing here that there was a graphite product which they used to target 90 WhatsApp users in more than 24 countries. So, like, this is sort of, software that's being used to like invade people's privacy and like attack people. So, I mean, this is like bad, whichever way you look at it. I mean, I don't think we should be saying that, this sort of thing should be used against anybody because, that'll invade people's privacy. So, it's kind of concerning that there is such a booming industry for spyware and it's only getting like worse. Like you said, there was like some stuff that was going on in the US with like the ICE people using it. But yeah, I don't really have much to add on this. I don't really have a US perspective. But yeah, if there's anything else you want to add here, Kevin, I feel like that would be interesting.
I think something to keep in mind if you are interested in type of work is that the Atlantic Council does a lot of focus on targeted spyware. Ironically enough, despite being very pro-American and very pro-NATO Atlanticist, they tend to also do a lot of advocacy work against targeted spyware. And so their report has actually been quite detailed in examining at least the growing American usage of targeted spyware, which I think it says a lot about how things have changed over the past 5 to 10 years. If y'all remember Jamal Khashoggi, essentially what happened was his family and his maid, their devices were affected by Pegasus, which is a targeted spyware software that is made by the infamous NSO Group. And while there was a lot of outrage, a lot of sanctions against NSO Group by the US, and specific regulations trying to regulate the access of dual-use technologies, such as the concept of a spyware service, for example, all that has gone through the bin. If you were alive 5 years ago and thought, okay, obviously the US is against targeted spyware, that's not the case anymore. And this sudden shift, ironically enough, from the growing endorsement of targeted spyware to informal investments by hedge funds and investment groups shows that there is a clear growing market for this. It's slowly being normalized by law enforcement officials across the world, regardless of your jurisdiction. And it's very clear that this isn't something that you should not ignore at all. So even from an ethical standpoint, though, I highly urge everyone who's watching, if you do invest your money in anything, please check whether or not you're actually supporting these mercenary spyware firms and help punish the companies that do endorse it.
Yeah, that's definitely a good idea. You should be like aware of what you're investing in and if, like we're saying here, if something is against your ethics, which I don't know, funding like investing in spyware companies, I don't know. I feel like if you're concerned about privacy, you probably wouldn't want to be investing in that because that's probably going to be used against people to invade their privacy. So I agree completely with what Kevin said. It's definitely important to see what you're invested in, and if you are invested in some of these companies that they list here, definitely think about maybe divesting and switching your investment to someone else or moving your money out. But with that being said, we can move on to this next story, and this is from TechCrunch, and it's Bluesky will comply with age verification laws in South Dakota and Wyoming after exiting Mississippi. So, if you've been following the news recently about age verification laws, you'll know that this has sort of been a ongoing issue, especially in the US. There's been a lot of states that have been putting into effect their age assurance laws. And we're seeing companies now trying to combat and move their services out of states where they don't want to be, where it's impossible for them to comply. And this is an interesting article because Bluesky blocked its service in Mississippi because of the new age assurance law they had there. So that was because they thought it was going to be too hard to actually apply that, apply what was required by that law. So instead, there's been sort of a different approach that they've been taking in South Dakota and Wyoming. So instead, they're going to require, um, basically, they're going to require people to verify their age through the Kids Web Services solution. And basically, actually, Kevin, do you actually know a little bit more about this? Because I'm not really familiar with this Kids Web Services like setup here.
I am not as well. This is the first time I'm hearing about this. If we're going to click on that link and look at the website itself, it seems to be another third-party verification app, and they're partnered with Epic Games of all people. Um, I don't know if that's something that you should be worried about specifically. The fact that that Epic Games is developing an age verification service, probably to like deal with any concerns age verification with the products like Fortnite. Um, but at least going back on topic though, um, something that I do want to emphasize is that federalism in the US usually means that different states have different laws. And to answer some of the questions that were like at least mentioned in discussion was that Mississippi's laws on age verification are much more strict than the laws in South Dakota and Wyoming. Hence, the oddly specific and quite frankly irrelevant states. No offense to anyone who lives there, um, reaching the headlines. Um, why South Dakota and Wyoming and not Mississippi? Well, the answer is simple. Mississippi has incredibly strict laws, while South Dakota and Wyoming offer more flexible laws, at least in terms of like implementing age verification solutions. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that compliance is always, the best idea here. Uh, for a lot of folks operating on principle, maybe Bluesky should have withdrawn entirely from states that offer age verification, and that's the approach offered by most, not most, but some websites and social media platforms. But unfortunately, the vast majority of apps will implement some form of age verification, and that's something you should definitely be concerned about. Um, So no, Bluesky isn't the principal privacy champion you might expect from the company, as you may have seen more censorship-resistant apps like Mastodon. But at the end of the day, Bluesky as a company has to comply with local regulation, and there's a bit of a pragmatic approach when it comes to compliance. That's very fascinating when you see how do modern like websites actually do comply with these overarching requests. Age verification is spreading across the world, and we don't really know how companies and websites react to it. If this is something you're really interested in, I highly recommend reading into more about how different countries implement age verification, not necessarily in the US, but also in the UK, Australia, because I heard the age verification there is overarching and much more strict and consistent since there's a different system compared to the US, unfortunately, or fortunately compared to where you live. Um, and that, would you like to talk more about like how like gentrification works in Australia, Jordan?
Yeah, so I guess in a slightly better way, I don't know if it's slightly better or if it's, I don't know, it seems worse to me, but basically our government has basically set forth a law that requires social media companies to basically check that people are over the age of 16. So basically anyone under the age of 16 can't use social media. So I don't really know if this is a good thing because basically what this means is every single social media website has to request your ID now. It's still like the companies still have time to implement this system. So like in Australia, for example, I think it's like somewhere next year that they have to comply or they'll start facing fines and such. So, I mean, is this a good idea? No. Is the way that they're doing it in this case with the kids' web services solution good? I'm gonna say no. Like, I don't really think this is great in either direction. I think we've kind of talked about this quite a bit, but age verification laws are not really going to protect people and they're going to lead to people getting their identity stolen. Like, their identity documents, because like this website mentioned, like they still require you to like, provide payment ID, ID documents, face scans, and in a lot of cases, if your face fails the face scan system, which is already a bit of a privacy nightmare because there's like, collecting face scans of people, then I mean, you're gonna have to upload your ID, and we don't really know like the security of these platforms. But I think another like thing that is kind of interesting about this is Bluesky kind of touts itself as this decentralized service, but now we're seeing all these age verification laws coming in. It's really not so decentralized now, is it? Like, it's really quite centralized, and there's sort of the ability to apply this age verification restrictions is down to like this Bluesky company that basically runs the majority of the infrastructure, as I'm aware of. So it's kind of a bit, I don't know, silly, I think, to say that this is like a decentralized, privacy respecting platform. They're basically doing all the same stuff that I've seen all the other social media platforms doing, and they're not really decentralized, at least from the way that I see it. So I think I would urge people, if you're on Bluesky, maybe consider trying the Fediverse. It hasn't been an issue there yet. Maybe that's just because it's so tiny compared to Bluesky, because I know Bluesky has definitely become like, at least in the US, it's become one of the like bigger social media apps now, and it's definitely not rivaling like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, but it's definitely like a bigger option that more people are aware of compared to like Mastodon or like Pleroma or any of these like Fediverse platforms. So I would say it's kind of a bit of an interesting thing here. Like, it's not great that they're applying age verification laws to all these platforms, but I think we should be against it in general. Like, we shouldn't be pushing for like privacy respecting ways to do this. We should really just be against it entirely. We've kind of talked about this quite a lot, and I remember that we had quite a lot of coverage on that previously. So definitely check out our blog section if you want to get in on that. But was there anything else you thought about this, Kevin? I noticed that they said there was going to be in Mississippi they were actually like doing penalties of up to 10,000 per user that they didn't do. So it kind of makes sense why they didn't want to do it there, and they just decided to block the service.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the specifics of the Mississippi law in question, but I do know that if you threaten a lot of punishment for what's relatively an impossible solution to resolve at that point, you might as well just withdraw it. I do think, however, that this age verification law from Mississippi is clearly just meant to ban um, essentially almost every single social media platform and adult content platform that exists, because you can't risk spending $10,000 per person, uh, because at the end of the day, there are people that will fake it, um, regardless of whatever system that you do implement for verification. So it's just too risky for a small company like Bluesky, and I'm kind of sad that this essentially just blocks out the small players and enforces the monopoly of the current tech giants that do have stringent verification rules. Um, but yeah, I think that's all I have, at least for Bluesky. Jordan, do you have anything else to comment on before we move on to the next article?
No, not really. I just think, make sure that when you see these age verification laws, make sure your like voice is heard about this. Make sure like people in your life, you're explaining why this is bad, because I think a lot of people are pretty on board with this because, at the face, it is definitely hard to be against this, but if you explain things in more like in-depth terms and explain why this might be not a great idea, I think a lot of people might be on board with being against this, but it's kind of unfortunate that we're seeing so much of this happening in so many states in the US and also just countries in general, like the UK and Australia. I think in the next couple of years, once these systems are actually fully rolled out, we're going to see some pretty terrible consequences. So it's really unfortunate, but I think you need to make sure your voice is heard on this topic. But yeah, that's all I kind of had to say on that.
Yeah, there's also an alternate solution, not having social media in the first place, but we know how hard it is nowadays, though. especially for younger folks. So I implore everyone to think of not necessarily our generation or your generation, but future generations who do need to have social media, who are immersed in this. I personally remember a time without social media, and I'm quite young myself. I'm sure Jordan does too. But there are folks growing up right now who use a computer constantly, who do have social media, and there will be always ways to circumvent things, and it's just going to cause a lot more dangerous consequences for privacy, for our young children. So please keep that in mind when you try to like advocate for things. Anyways, we would like to go into our last article for tonight before we go on to forum updates and questions. This one specifically is about the Pixel 10, and it's not directly a privacy question, but it's more so a OPSEC question, I would say. This is something that I'm personally very confused about. I'd love to like at least discuss it on the live stream. So Google Pixel 10 in Photos will now embed a new form of attribute. Think of it as like a metadata, of course, called the C2PA content credentials into all JPEGs taken with the photos and default camera app, which essentially cryptographically signs each photo with device unique keys and secure hardware to record creation and editing history. This essentially enables users to verify the authenticity of media and help counter AI generated fakes. Now, maybe it's just a way to normalize this type of photo verification tech. And perhaps it does have some good benefits, especially for folks who, you know, do want to ensure that their content is not AI generated. Um, there are some potential like OPSEC concerns. It essentially creates a new form of metadata, I'd say. Because right now, if you have a Pixel 10 and you use either the Photos app or the camera app, I haven't tested out myself, but there is a genuine possibility that it could emit this new form of metadata into your photos. Of course, maybe there's a way to clear this out automatically through, for example, Signal, which automatically wipes out all like XF data. But I'm definitely am concerned about at least this specific, the C2PA content credentials, because could it be wiped currently by all the metadata erasing apps so far? I'm not sure. I haven't tested it out yet, but it could potentially, at least right now, identify all the photos you take as belonging to a phone that is a Pixel 10, which greatly, um, you know, adds on to your potential like profile that creates for you if for some reason you really need to like emphasize anonymity over all else. So if you are a high risk person with a Pixel 10, and you may want to double check this piece of metadata and ask yourself, hey, will this be wiped when I do erase the metadata of my photos? Test it out. Please let us know, like in the chat or on the forum, whether or not you notice that this could be a potential problem or not. Because right now, I don't have the capacity to test it out. Maybe others have already tested it out, but right now this is a very new feature, very cutting edge, specifically by Pixel 10 devices. So I think this could be a potential concern in the future. I like to ask Jordan though, if like, do you have any like background knowledge on like these metadata, or do you have the same concerns as well?
So, I mean, yeah, I've looked into this like content credential system. I wasn't aware that it was coming to like the way that they're suggesting this works is it's more of an integration with Google Pixel devices, but content credentials are a thing we've had for a while now. And it was sort of there is a way you can test these things. There's like a content credential website where you can see if something's AI generated or not. Basically, when you generate an image with like an AI thing, it can, I think ChatGPT automatically adds like a content credential that says it was generated with ChatGPT. I mean, I think it's interesting, right? But with these like uh metadata like uh wiping tools, I think it actually is pretty effective at just like removing this entirely. So, I mean, it is a good way to actually like prove that something isn't AI generated, but it's not really useful for the other way around. If you get what I mean, like if something is like AI generated, you could probably tell that it's you could probably wipe that it is AI generated, but you wouldn't be able to do it the other way around. You wouldn't be able to say that an image is genuine, basically. So, I mean, this is kind of a good idea, I guess, if you want to be able to prove that something hasn't been tampered with AI. But I think like a major problem that we're seeing these days is I see a lot of people accusing things of being AI when they're not actually AI. And I feel like it's gotten to a point now where people can't really tell because like I'll go onto like a YouTube short or like a YouTube video and someone will say, "This video is AI. Is this AI?" And a lot of times it's not, and sometimes it is. And I think it's kind of interesting because we're sort of getting to the point where like the line between like real and like artificially generated content is like getting extremely thin, and the ability to tell whether something is actually real or not is a little bit of an issue. And I mean, this is Google we're talking about here. I mean, like Kevin said, this is a bit of a concern from like a metadata perspective because you are adding extra information to the photo, and we don't really recommend sharing photos with metadata. We recommend erasing it because there's a lot of information that photos can have attached to them. For instance, some people like to have their location attached to photos that they take. For instance, like let's say they have like all their photos backed up to Google Photos. They want to be able to see where they took a photo, basically. And sometimes if you're not careful, you can actually share the photo and it can have your location attached. So like, this sort of metadata, it's just another thing that's going to be attached to a picture, and it's another way that information could be extracted and exfiltrated from photos. So I mean, it's good that it's like useful, I guess, like to show that something is genuine, but at least in Google's implementation, they promise that it's like going to be protected by like cryptographic keys that are stored on the Pixel devices inside the Titan M security chip, and it's sort of backed by cryptography, so the privacy and security of this seems to be sound, at least. But I think the main concern that we have is just adding extra metadata to an image is not really great, and we recommend wiping images of all the metadata before you send them to someone else because there could be information on there that can be exfiltrated. But that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, that sounds really good and very comforting too. Obviously, like there's not a lot of folks out there, at least in price, that do own a Pixel 10. So definitely let us know of your concerns and questions about this feature. I do think with AI, that AI generated content we definitely do need a way to verify whether or not like something is real or not, and it's incredibly challenging to implement a good solution for this. So who knows? Maybe props to Google for trying at least. Then again, I do have mixed feelings about at least embedding this specific form of credentials with every photo. But at least, who knows? Maybe this will be normalized across the industry, so we'll reduce our tax service a little bit. So it could be like a necessary sacrifice for now if you're really concerned about metadata. But if you're concerned that maybe you accidentally send a photo with the metadata included. But we always recommend you to always wipe the metadata of your photos, of course. Anyways, that's all I have for at least regarding this article. Do you think it's good to move on to any of the forum updates, Jordan?
Yeah, so I think we can sort of move on to the forum updates. So if you want to take the first one here, Kevin.
Of course, of course. We're now going to look at the first forum discussion in which a user claims that VPNs may compromise your privacy because it will send net flow data. There's been a lot of back and forth, at least when I read this, about whether or not VPNs actually do compromise your privacy. But I like to first preface that, at least with this user specifically, is that there's definitely a difference between anonymity and privacy and security. Of course, all three are completely different things, and relying on VPNs as a way to protect your identity or in short, anonymity, should be relied upon in the first place. You should use something like Tor, for example, which does include everything that you may be concerned about in mind. However, VPNs are excellent for hiding to your local ISP or IT team that you're using or visiting a specific website. It's useful for hiding from your local network that are using Tor. It's very useful for at least like being a first level of obfuscation between you and the website you're visiting. Um, so VPNs definitely do have a use for sure, and I want to emphasize that regardless of whether NetFlow data could be used to de-anonymize you, I want to emphasize that VPNs are not meant to protect your anonymity. They're useful for at least securing and like encrypting the website traffic data that you send to your ISP, whatever websites you visit. Um, with that in mind, though, wondering if Jordan had any more knowledge about like at least NetFlow data, as I personally do not. I'm not studying networks yet enough, obviously.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely an interesting idea, right? This analyzing of NetFlow data. I think basically the only company or like organization that I've seen that's come out like and said this is sort of quite a big issue is Molvad. I think they've got their defense against AI guided traffic analysis tool that they've added to some servers on their VPN product. And I think this is sort of a response to this sort of threat. And I think when we're getting towards a lot of these like AI tools that can analyze traffic, I think a human can't analyze the traffic and data as well as like sort of an AI guided tool. So I think we are sort of getting to this point where this might actually become sort of a threat that people should be concerned about. And it's good to see at least Molvad and at least the from what I'm understanding, NIM VPN also does it. I'm not too familiar with NIM. I'm not really familiar with their setup and how they work, so I can't really comment on that in particular, but I can say I have used the Molvad data system, and apart from like very high increase of traffic usage, it does seem to work pretty well. Unfortunately, it's only available in some locations, so like if this is sort of a concern, I would say you should probably look at using Tor. I mean, there's still issues with Tor itself, but I think since there's more hops that need to occur, it makes it more, it has more protection against this sort of analysis of traffic. So, I mean, it's definitely a threat to think about, but I think about like a lot of people's threat model is this is sort of a targeted thing, I would say, as of right now. And maybe once we get to a point where like AI traffic analysis becomes like more widespread, it could become more of an issue where there needs to be more proactive measures taken. But as far as I'm aware, this is not like a huge issue. But like the way that apparently according to this thing here is like they use like sort of NIM uses like a mix net of like hops, which would obviously be a lot better than just having a single node like a normal VPN. Um, but I think it comes with a lot of trade-offs when you have all these hops that are happening because it'll slow down your internet, it'll increase ping and whatnot. So I think Molvad's like an system here is seems to be a bit better in terms of like performance and usability. So that's kind of my thoughts. But do you have anything else you wanted to add there, Kevin?
No, I think that sounds is good for this topic. I think we all can learn the lesson in which if you are concerned about FL data and you are concerned about targeted attacks, please use Tor. And potentially, we want to look into anti-forensics as well. Something like Tails OS or Cubes could potentially like help you not only like resist at least the anonymization if your device does get infected with malware, but at least with Tails can help you like with the anti-forensics aspect of things as well if you do anticipate an attack. Anyways, I'd like to move on to the next topic. I want to skip ahead actually because we did have one topic about Windows 11, but since we're currently running short on time, we're going to go into our last topic about Proton, specifically Proton deleting an account of a journalist doing responsible disclosure to the South Korean government. Um, we didn't include it as a news story specifically because it's still an ongoing topic and there's a lot of debates and discussion about it. But at least like from at least I know according to the users specifically, it's the community is quite split on this. Is Proton necessarily doing the right thing here? Why is their public relations team consistently being combative when responding to any these concerns in the first place? At least in the form, of course, like we don't really know what is necessarily going on. Proton claims that there's a mistake when they're deleting accounts that are suspected of hacking or any other illegal activities, and that this specific journalist in mind who was doing a false disclosure to the South Korean government simply got caught up and will have their account restored later. This still, however, doesn't change the fact there's a lot of concerns on whether Proton A communicated this in the right manner, or B, why does this even occur in the first place? And frankly, I'm confused as well. So far, like at least like it's incredibly difficult to investigate every single report that comes along with your service. But with Proton being an email platform used by a lot of whistleblowers, but also journalists as well. During my time with the Freedom Press Foundation, I've worked with establishing tip lines with a lot of smaller newsrooms. And the most easiest way to adopt a tip line is to open up a Proton email address and label that as your official tip line. Of course, this is not recommended to most folks because firstly, Proton is a company. Well, we'll have to disable accounts to comply with local laws. And we don't really know for sure whether this should be reliable in the future, though. So I do have to say, though, if you are a journalist seeking to do responsible disclosure or receive potential whistleblower files, I have to recommend using a dedicated service like Secure Drop and other things like Global Leaks as well. Or if you want a budget approach to things, you can also you get a phone and install Signal on it as well as your own tip line. But once again, there are a lot of solutions out there that could work better than a Proton email address. Keep in mind that Proton is a company at the end of the day, and that if you do intend on working on sensitive information, you should not rely on a single company for your tip line needs. Consider decentralized open source alternatives and to avoid potential legal mishaps, even if all this is technically a mistake on Proton's end.
Right, 100%. I agree with basically everything you said there. I think we shouldn't be blaming the people that got their accounts disabled here, that they should have used a better tool or whatever. I think this is just an unfortunate incident, right? There's not really a whole lot of information on how this actually went down, so I'm not really going to comment too much on that because I feel like the actual sort of situation is still somewhat unclear, and Proton has been sort of not super open about what's going on, so I don't think we can comment too publicly on that. But I think, yeah, using tools that are like designed specifically for like disclosure of information, which have baked anonymity into the software, like Kevin said, like what is it called? Hushline?
I think it's called Hushline. Yeah, Hushline, Global Leaks, and Secure Drop. They're the three main providers so far.
Perfect. Yeah, those three, and a lot of like, magazines, websites, all sorts of like government agencies also have these services set up. So I mean, I think that it's unfortunate that these journalists got their accounts disabled, but we need to be pushing for like organizations to be using like very secure things that protect journalists and actually won't have this happen. And I think, having the ability to make an anonymous tip or anonymous contribution to something is extremely important. And I think the biggest thing that we need to take away from this is using these tools that protect journalists instead of, a situation where there could be a concern where, accounts get disabled because technically they're being used against the terms of service or for any other reason, right? Having it so that it's completely anonymous, is not connected to any like static identity is the most important thing. And I don't think that's really what Proton is entirely for. I would say if you're going to use Proton, or if you have to, I would just generate another account specifically for that use case, to avoid this sort of situation. But again, not blaming the people that got their accounts disabled. It sounds like it's an interesting situation, but we don't really have enough information to comment particularly on the entire situation, and I don't think it's that productive to get into a discussion about it because we would be speculating quite a lot. But I think it'll be interesting to see what if Proton does like sort of a announcement or a blog post or something about this, because as far as I was aware, like looking at these posts, they did get quite a bit of traction on Twitter. So they did end up responding publicly, like Proton did, but they were quite vague on the details, which kind of makes sense. But I think it's just good to highlight tools there that'll protect journalists in this case.
Of course, of course. We should not do any victim blaming. And at the end of the day, I think mistakes like these, if it is a mistake, shows to demonstrate that we should definitely broaden horizons, regardless of whether you're a dedicated Proton user or not. Proton does a lot of amazing work with their current ecosystem, and I still want to emphasize that. But depending on your situation, Joe, definitely consider other solutions that may work better if you cannot afford to lose even a service like an email address briefly. Of course, just to emphasize that. But yes, I think it's time to look at questions, I believe. Right, Jordan?
Awesome. Yeah, let's head into some questions here and then we'll close out the stream for this week. All right, so let's take a look at some of the first questions we've got here. Kevin, did you see any that popped out to you?
No, I'm having trouble accessing the questions, at least on my end. Were there any questions like on the YouTube live?
I did see some questions here on the forum thread, which we can sort of get to. There was a question from Johnny Gossamer again, so thank you, Johnny, for another question this week. I really appreciate you just contributing and having comments and giving feedback every week, because we're trying to learn here, we're trying to make it better, so I really appreciate that. And they were sort of asking about the Tor VPN, and they asked a couple of questions about, you know, the implementation of the app, which I feel like we've sort of gone over. It's basically, they were kind of wondering whether Tor VPN would be like a halfway point between Tails OS or any other mainstream OS. And Skewed Zeppelin, who's like the former developer of Devest OS, did respond and had some good responses there that I thought were quite good. Let me just bring this up on the screen for everyone to have a look. They said Tor VPN is just a modern re-implementation of Orbot using ARTI officially by the Tor project. So we kind of already covered that already. And yeah, as of right now, it's Android only, and the speeds will be the same. There's like not really a huge amount to go with like Tor VPN. It's really just a re-implementation of Orbot using the Rust-based ARTI instead. So thank you, Skewed Zeppelin, for answering that question there. Great responses there. But yeah, we're kind of echoing what you said there. Definitely some good responses there. It's not like a huge, amazing thing, Tor VPN, but I definitely think it's an interesting new development from the Tor project and definitely worth covering this week. Did you see any other questions here?
Oh, yes. I see a question by the user named Privacy is Consent. And they're concerned about whether, I guess they're concerned about whether or not, like, if they were to do a connection on a per application basis, is that necessarily worth it at the end of the day? Maybe it's better to at least to have like specific profiles or parties to be contacted. Like they're not sure if that's worth it if they were to contact over a random circuit. I personally am not too familiar with Tor and how it necessarily should be used by Graphene OS users specifically. But I think like all in all, like I don't know whether or not like the application should be recommended in the first place though. Doing it on a per application basis, I don't think it's default by Tor. I believe it routes everything through Tor VPN. But then again, though, if I were to comment on how Tor VPN works, as someone who hasn't used Tor VPN before, it wouldn't really make sense here. But do you have any specific knowledge about that, Jordan?
So I guess in regards to like Graphene OS, excuse me, I think like as long as you don't have the VPN connection like blocking connections outside the tunnel, it will allow you to like select individual circuits and only have specific apps going through the tunnel. The issue is when you have it blocking all traffic outside the tunnel. That's where you're not going to be able to have split tunneling work. So that's a concern. It's not a concern specific to Graphene OS. It's specifically just any Android operating system that has the block internet access without the tunnel feature. So I think like if you want to have things separated, you should probably look at making like user profiles instead of like if you don't want things to leak, I would recommend user profiles instead, because then you can have it blocking the connection in that profile and it won't leak outside of that profile. So then you can have it blocking all connections outside the tunnel, and that will be much more like rubber seal. It'll be a much better seal than what you would get if you had everything in one profile and just set up like split tunneling. So that's probably what I would recommend if you need to have like specific apps that only go through the Tor VPN. And I think that's probably the best way to do it. And as far as I'm aware, that's not specific to Graphene OS. You can do that on standard Android devices as long as it has the profile feature, which I think just like stock Android has 2 profiles, but I think you get like up to 16 or something on Graphene OS. So that's an interesting way to do it. That's what I would recommend. But yeah, I'd say I would probably look away from using this Invisible Pro app and probably look at our recommendations. And as far as I'm aware, we don't recommend that. So I would definitely maybe look into some of the forum posts about it, why it's not recommended. I can't really comment on it because I haven't used it before. So that's all I would say.
Thank you so much, Jordan, for answering that. We'd actually like to move on to the next question by Anonymous368. How does a local-based password manager compare to a cloud-based manager? Something like Vault Warden or KeePass XE. Does it make a difference if I were to use KeePass and back up to the cloud compared to something like Bitwarden? I am curious because there is a lot of conflicting information online. I have been self-hosting a couple other services like Pi-hole and Miniflex. I'm not someone who is a person who is just a normal person. Yeah, so I believe like what you mean here is a on-device password manager versus a self-hosted password manager rather than a cloud-based manager, such as the majority of services online like LastPass or Bitwarden, for example. Assuming that, I believe an on-device password manager reduces the risk of potential leaks. When you do self-host your own password manager, there isn't really a guarantee that it will be end-to-end encrypted unless you do actually configure it that way. What a lot of people who do first like jump into self-hosting is that they may use something like Nextcloud, right? And so far, though, end-to-end encryption is rather outdated on Nextcloud, and there isn't really a lot of like activity, at least on that development so far. So there's obviously like if you're using like a certain service and it's not end-to-end encrypted, it could potentially be quite dangerous. But at least with an on-device password manager, it is kept within your device, obviously, and it's local storage. Therefore, it reduces that risk entirely. I do say though, if you're first like an amateur at self-hosting, there's nothing wrong with using Vault Warren and KeePass XE as long as you configure it correctly. It is possible to still have an end-to-end encrypted connection to your home lab or your home server from your device. Entirely possible. A lot of people have done it before, but just keep that in mind though when you're first starting out. It's really easy to make mistakes, um, and try to keep that in mind though when you do read online documentation. Um, I do say though, if your concern is mostly about privacy rather than security, and you're 100% confident within like when you're configuring your home lab or home server, um, definitely do consider using Vault Warner and Key just like learn from this experience, also like have a more seamless experience across devices. Um, of course, like I can't really comment on whether like one is better than the other. I do say though, if you're incredibly paranoid and you are a person of interest, you should have consider using an on-device password manager rather than cloud VPN, just to reduce the risk of doing so and of any leaks in the first place.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree with a lot of the stuff you said
yeah,
there. I think one of the issues here is comparing a local password manager to a cloud-based password manager. I think it depends on what you mean. Like, if we're talking about Vault Warden, I think there's definitely, like Kevin said, there's a bit more risk involved with that because you are setting something up, and unless you're like like someone who knows a lot about sort of setting up these services, it's possible you could accidentally misconfigure something or something isn't set up correctly and it could leak information or be hacked into, for instance. But if you're confident in the way that you can have a public facing service and secure it properly, then I would say it's worth doing. But I think one thing that a lot of people miss is with these cloud-based password managers like Bitwarden, 1Password, I know there's another one that we recommend as well. They do have a security team on call 24/7. They're monitoring things, they're making sure that there's no like security issues. The security level is going to be a lot higher than something you host yourself. But of course, because they are a public password manager, there's going to be a lot more reason for hackers to attack that service. So I think there's, two sides to that. And if you're hosting your own Vault Warden instance, it's very likely it's only being like, visited by bots and AI scrapers. So there's like the idea of like, I don't know, like it's sort of not very likely that people are going to try and attack that specific instance. Um, so it's definitely something to think about. I think having your password on your device and not syncing it anywhere is definitely the most safe. But again, that's going to be kind of a pain in the butt, especially if you have multiple devices. There's got to be a way for you to have it up to date on every device. And I think there's definitely, it depends on how many passwords you have, but if you keep making new accounts on each device and then you kind of have sync conflicts or like you try and merge them together and there's issues, it can kind of be a problem. I think that's where something like Vault Warden makes a lot more sense, especially if you're managing a lot of accounts and sort of things like that. But I mean, I don't think you can't really make a wrong decision here. It kind of matters on your situation. I think if you need the convenience of a cloud-based password manager, I would go with a cloud-based password manager. But if you need that extra security, something like Vault Warden, which you could, protect behind like a WireGuard VPN or something, so it's a lot harder to access, but it restricts access to only you. That could also be a good idea. But I think if you're doing something locally and you're self-hosting something, the most important thing is making backups, because the last thing you want to do is be locked out of things. So, make 3-2-1 backups of everything. Make sure you've got backups because, oh my goodness, you definitely don't want to lose access to your passwords because that's going to be a nightmare. But that's kind of, sorry, kind of rambling, but yeah, that was what I was trying to say.
yeah, no worries. I think that was an excellent way of answering that question. Like completely, always make backups. Um, always look at your situation and consider the cost between convenience versus uh, active configuration, safety, I would say, and always be vigilant about whether or not you're actually up to the task of assuring that your self-hosted password manager is actually secure enough. Keep in mind, if you're going to do self-host your services, be very active in it. Don't just leave it alone. In that note, we'll go on to the final question in this thread. Formerly, Hello Echo says, you mentioned earlier that configuring a VPN on router can conceal Tor traffic. While the Tor project generally advises against combining VPNs with Tor for typical users, Proton VPN offers a one-click getaway into the Tor network. Over the years, there have been differing opinions on the merits and drawbacks of both Tor over VPN and VPN over Tor. I'd appreciate hearing both of your perspectives on the relative risk of each approach. Um, First off, at least on our official knowledge base, we do have one recommendation, which is if you believe that any semblance of an active Tor connection or Tor traffic could endanger you, consider using a bridge or a VPN like on your router or on your device before connecting to Tor project. Any sort of combination, which is VPN, Tor VPN, would just simply create a permanent exit node, which could definitely harm your anonymity. There are a lot of concerns, however, of simply having a permanent entry node, which would be your VPN connection if you connect to it before Tor. And there's some potential anonymity risk involved with it, because essentially what happens is, yes, if an attacker, let's say, was able to anonymize you and realizes that you are connecting to a VPN server, and this attacker believes that you're an important person to get, and they will raid you, they may be willing to launch a official legal subpoena towards that VPN service. So we highly recommend that if you do decide to do the VPN and then Tor approach, to make sure you have a trusted VPN provider that does not keep logs like Molvad, and potentially pay anonymity, pay with an anonymous currency like Monero, for example, or through cash. And that way, there's less information kept by the company, and they're less likely to give up your information. Um, However, there's nothing particularly wrong with using just a Tor connection. Um, I would say though, like vast majority of users will benefit from just using Tor. A VPN is very useful only if you're concerned about how your Tor traffic will appear by your local ISP or a local IT administrator. For example, if you're on school Wi-Fi or college Wi-Fi, I think most of it is university, so I'll say university Wi-Fi. It could be beneficial to just use a VPN first and then Tor, especially if, for example, you want to hide from folks that you connect to Tor. It adds a lot of plausible deniability because VPN connections are quite normal nowadays. I think across the world, it's becoming a lot more normalized to avoid age verification laws, unfortunately. But at least in that case, VPN usage is starting to become more normalized across the world. So you're less likely to be suspected of something if you just use VPN. But if you're just connecting, for example, on a home network in an uncensored country, such as those in the West, um, maybe you could definitely consider just using Tor. I would say if you're not particularly too concerned about how your Tor traffic will appear online. It'll once again allow the Tor project to normalize Tor users, and maybe if enough Tor users do hop on the network, maybe one day it will be normalized as much as VPNs are. But of course, that isn't really the case right now. And I'd say it really does depend on your situation. Um, of course, like, we can't really gauge what situation you're in right now. And this is something you're incredibly concerned about. Feel free to reach out with a specific question on the forum. We're happy to help you. Pass it on with Jordan. Plus, pass it on to Jordan for any final thoughts.
Incredible overview there. Exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself. But I would say like the one thing that like I've seen people say that I don't think you mentioned was like deep packet inspection can sort of reveal that you're using Tor, like even if you use a bridge. So I think that is like a situation where you might want to use a VPN as well. But yeah, I think like Kevin said, like VPNs are a lot more common. So if you use a VPN and then access Tor, it's going to look a lot less suspicious. But again, I think Jonah, this is like unrelated to privacy guides, but on Jonah's like personal channel, he did a video about using Tor with a VPN. So if you're interested in that, check that out. I think that's a good resource because there's definitely some interesting like misinformation about this, and I think Kevin beautifully put that people should use a VPN with Tor because it is actually something that does give you some benefits. And yeah, I would definitely look into it before you do it though. I would definitely, make sure you're informed before you do it. But I think it's definitely quite an interesting discussion to have. But with that being said, I think there was like a couple of questions here in the YouTube live stream. We'll just quickly cover some of those. We got a question here from, oh my goodness, LDDKFFDK. Thanks for your comment. What are your personal browsing setups? Personally, I like Zen browser. I was like formerly somewhat of an Arc user. I do like vertical tabs, so for like general browsing stuff, Zen browser. But for like, searching like sensitive information, I prefer Molvad browser. So I use two browsers at the same time. I think people should try and use more than one if you have different use cases. So that's sort of what I use. But what about you, Kevin, if you're comfortable sharing, of course?
I believe I switched so many times, but I started with being a very devout Firefox user, and I ended up using Brave just so I have compatibility with, school and university website restrictions. They love using Chrome, so Brave is constantly after Chrome. And I still noticed some issues at the end of the day, though, which is a bummer. But hey, you do what you gotta do. But then I've started following quite recently the recent recommendations of using Molvad browser as a general search uh, for general searches. I'd say not particularly anything related to accounts or most normal usage, just as a way of doing like quick anonymous searches without the fingerprinting. And so far, I really do like how they essentially separated uh, at least the anti-fingerprinting features of Tor browser without Tor. Um, and it could be really good daily for any searches I might do that aren't necessarily relevant to any of the accounts I do have. So that's my browsing setup. Personally, I know quite boring. I just follow the recommendations, but so far I think like at least for uh, the aspects of my life where I have to use a Chrome-based browser, I think Brave does a phenomenal job. But I'm really excited to see like at least alternatives too, like Trilevent, which I have used in the past, and I encountered some issues with it. But again, I feel like most of the issues kind of revolve around Secure Blue, not necessarily um, this against the browser itself. So I would say though, at least for me personally, uh, I've tried a variety of solutions, but I think Brave and Molva browser works for me just fine. Although I'm sure there's a lot of people who had an amazing time with Trilevent on Secure Blue specifically. Um, as for other questions, Tejas says, "Is there a link to the Tor VPN page? I searched the web and couldn't find anything." And then we then proceeded to link that, which is great. Um, they then asked again, any updates on Graphene OS? They said they're looking for an OEM. No, unfortunately, we'll be speculating on a lot of things about this OEM, but I do have to say though, it probably won't be Samsung unless somehow in the future Samsung surprises us with a completely unlocked bootloader in their future devices. We don't really have any like model device right now that do comply with the requirements. I do believe that this so-called device will be ready in the future. If I were to predict something, it will probably be a smaller OEM, like nothing HBM or Motorola. But Jordan, do you have any like potential predictions or ideas?
Yeah, I mean, we're really just speculating here. I have absolutely no idea what this will look like, but I think it's interesting to see what will happen. I think we do need to like get away from Google because right now they're kind of in a terrible spot. They keep saying they're going to release the QPR1 source code and they still haven't. I have no idea what is happening with that. It's very concerning. Like we're still waiting on like custom operating systems to get access to that. So it's kind of unfortunate that like Google is sort of, it seems like they might have laid off some people on their team, and that's why it's taking longer to get updates out. So I'm kind of concerned about that, and that sort of leads to, if we did have like another OEM providing uh, hardware and software updates support, then this sort of issue wouldn't really be a thing. So, I mean, I don't really know who it's going to be. It's probably, like you said, going to be a smaller OEM. Personally, I wish it was Samsung because I do really like Samsung's hardware. I think Samsung's hardware is pretty incredible. Like the performance, the cameras, the quality of materials that they use. It's incredible, like the build quality that they've got there. But I think at the end of the day, Samsung is probably a bit too big, and I think they probably wouldn't be that interested in that idea, especially because it would be quite a small uh, project for them. Because considering they're like basically the biggest Android, um, or one of the biggest, I will say, because I know there's a lot of Chinese brands that are doing quite well, like Vivo and Huawei and all these other ones. So I think it's definitely interesting to keep an eye on, and I do hope they find a good OEM and we do get something that's similar quality to like the Pixel devices, because I think the Pixel devices have quite good build quality. At least they do now. They haven't always had great build quality, but I think it's definitely interesting, and I do hope it's actually something that has better performance than Pixels because oh my goodness, I'm just so sick of the Pixels. Like the performance is just it's so bad. I just I really hope they have something that has Snapdragon chips because the Tensor, even though it's built by like TSMC now, fabricated by TSMC, I think it's still nowhere near like the Snapdragon chips. So it's interesting. I hope it's like, affordable for people because I know that's one issue that a lot of people had with the Pixels is they're not available everywhere and they're kind of expensive as well. Like especially when we start looking at like the Pixel 10 and the Pixel 10 Pro and the Pixel 10 Pro XL, it ends up being quite expensive. And I think it's kind of inaccessible for a lot of people. So I think if, these Graphene OS people, if they partnered with an OEM that provided cheaper devices, then that would be great to make it more accessible to people because the main issue that I have recommending like custom operating systems to people is they have to buy a whole new phone and it's kind of a big investment for people, especially if they don't even know if it will work for them. So if there was, a cheaper device that there was the ability to easily switch to that and be assured that, you would be getting software updates for a long time and also good build quality and repairability too, because that's one issue with like Google Pixel devices. They're still pretty terrible from a repairability perspective. I don't know what they were thinking with the Pixel 9 series. They've got like the battery glued in like a rock. It's like impossible to remove. So it's still like kind of a massive issue with these OEMs. They don't really care about that sort of thing. They care more about, uh making a nice looking device, not really repairability or anything like that. So
I
yeah.
guess would it be like waterproofness? I heard like at least I remember probably the reason why the headphone jack and this whole trend towards not having repairable devices is because of the fact they want to implement some form of waterproofness or basically make it waterproof at all. So that's why I heard at least why like repairability has gone so bad recently. Something I have watched online, however, is that besides the fact that you need like a heat gun to like peel off the screen, the Pixel 10 is surprisingly repairable. But then again, of course, needing a heat gun in the first place to remove the screen does not make it more repairable than something like the Fairphone.
Mm.
But then again, the Fairphone has its own problems as well, being a smaller OEM and all that. Also, I want to make a correction. I believe I said HBM instead of HMD. I apologize. For some reason, I was thinking about, I mixed up those two words out completely. But yeah, HMD, which is the European-made OEM. I haven't heard much about it, but I heard that's one of the candidates, at least for a potential like smaller OEM that could replace Google in the future.
They are
But
pretty interesting actually. HMD has like got some very nice repairable devices. So I think it would be very interesting if they decided to go with them. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense too because I believe they're advocating themselves as like a private European digital sovereignty OEM. And if you think about it, nothing is also sort of in a space, although obviously don't really care about privacy or digital sovereignty space as of right now. It could be a space for them to grow in the future. But I don't know if how they'll recover from the Nothing Phone 3 debacle and all that. Um, and with Motorola specifically, they're having a surprising like arc, I would say. Like they went from focusing solely on budget phones, but recently with the Motorola Razr and Razr Ultra, like they have gone insane amount of publicity and surge of sales. Look, potential in the future, they may have more resources to commit to faster software updates, which they've been notoriously been really bad at. So that's why a lot of folks say that Motorola could be a potential replacement for Google in the future. But then again, there's a lot of speculation. Please do not take anything we say as fact. Highly recommend that. We're just speculating based on what we know. But yeah, I think the final comment, at least in our YouTube chat, belongs to, well, sorry, I might butcher your name, either Bohan Stipic or Bojan Stipic, depending on where you're from. Says, Proton gave an official response on a disabled account situation on Reddit. Can I link it? Because YouTube seems to be blocking my comments with links. I am so sorry about that. Yeah, I don't think we see like at least that link in the chat. So it appears to be some YouTube issue. My apologies. But yeah, I don't really like. I haven't really seen that yet. Jordan, do you have access to the Reddit in question?
Yeah, I've got the post up. I can just read out what they said. We can't really, I don't really want to speculate too much, but this is exactly what they said. So we'll just read what they said. Hi everyone. No, Proton did not knowingly block journalists. Hold on, let me get this up on the screen. Knowingly block journalists' email accounts. Our support for journalists and those working in the public interest has been demonstrated time and time again through actions, not just words. In this case, we're alerted by a cert that certain accounts are being misused by hackers in violation of Proton's terms of service. This led to a cluster of accounts being disabled. So because of our zero trust architecture, we cannot see the contents of accounts and therefore cannot always know when anti-abuse measures may inadvertently affect legitimate activism. Our team has reviewed these cases individually to determine if any can be restored. We have now reinstated 2 accounts, but there are other accounts we cannot reinstate due to clear TOS violations. And then they responded to Frack's article here. Regarding Frack's claim on contacting our legal team 8 times, this is not true. We've only received 2 emails to our legal team inbox, last one on September 6th with a 48-hour deadline. This is unrealistic for a company the size of Proton, especially since the message was sent to our legal team inbox on a Saturday rather than through the proper customer support channels. The situation has unfortunately been blown out of proportion without giving us a fair chance to respond to the initial outreach. Thank you for your understanding. So, I don't know. This seems interesting, I guess. Kind of see what people are saying to this response. I don't know. This seems like a pretty canned response, so I don't really have much to add to what they've said. Did you have any thoughts on what I just said?
To avoid speculation, of course, I do say that if what Proton's saying is true, it was a mistake, and perhaps if the situation went a little better, perhaps there would have been a resolution without this blowing out proportion. Um, However, I'm a lot more concerned about, I would say, the optics of this, because at the end of the day, deleting random accounts is not particularly a good look for Proton, and perhaps the situation didn't happen in the first place. But I'll leave it at that, actually. I think there's a lesson to be learned here by Proton and by Proton users. And who knows, maybe this is a one-time thing. But yeah, that's all I have to say, at least about this situation. Because honestly, I definitely also want to avoid speculating as well.
Yeah, I think the one thing that like I had a concern with about this was what exactly does the cert mean? I thought they only responded to Swiss legal requests, so that's definitely a concern there. I don't really know what the difference is, so I can't really comment, but I thought they only responded to Swiss legal requests, so I guess if someone is violating their TOS, then disabling the account is not something that they need a Swiss legal request. They can just do that because it's in their TOS. They can disable account if they believe it's violating the TOS. So I guess that's different than handing over data to another company or another organization. So yeah, I don't really want to speculate too much, but I think this probably could have been handled a little bit better by both parties here. Frack could have waited a little bit longer instead of doing it on a Saturday, which I don't know. Would it have hurt to wait until Tuesday? Probably not. I think it could have been avoided, this whole situation. But it's, yeah, I'm not here to defend Proton or anything, but I think that they could have been handled better on both ends of this issue here. But with that being said, I feel like, oh wow, we've been going for an hour and 40 minutes here. So a little bit over time. We should probably close out the stream now. But with that being said, is there anything you wanted to add, actually, Kevin, before we switch to the outro here?
No, but I think that's pretty much all we had to say. But thank you so much for coming to our stream. Really appreciate it. This is my second live stream with as a co-host, and I do emphasize that your support has been amazing. Thank you for your feedback and criticism, and make sure to make this even better from now on forth. Anyways,
yeah, awesome.
I'll pass it on to Jordan to end the stream.
Thank you everybody for your feedback on like the audio levels and all of that. That's been amazing. But I will just say, I'll just hand it back to you, Kevin. Do you want to quickly just talk about our newsletter and how people can get subscribed to that, and what you can get from subscribing?
Oh, for sure, yes. So as you may have known, like if you had subscribed previously, you might have received a newsletter with us over the past like few months, and then recently like had a long pause. We have restarted our newsletters, and you should expect to see them come out every week or so. We're still working on the details of when they should be scheduled. My personal like schedule will have to be in sync with, of course, this plan, of course. So we're still like discussing how would this necessarily be sent over and the schedule of it. But then again, if there are any other updates about the newsletter, we'll let you all know on the forum. But if you're interested in subscribing, I would say like the best thing you will get is not only like a recap of last week's stream, but also potential like updates on our forum as well. So if you don't have, for example, privacy guides like on your RSS feed, well, assuming if you do have an RSS feed, a newsletter could be a more traditional way of receiving the latest and greatest from privacy guides, including articles, live streams, and potentially other things as well. We're still working on how we can better make the non-announcements be more unique. But I do have to say, though, we have a lot in the works right now. We're going to keep you waiting. But for the next week, though, expect a lot of exciting developments. I'll pass on to Jordan to end the stream.
Awesome. Yes, thank you for that recap there of the newsletter that we've been rolling out. So with that being said, all the updates from This Week in Privacy will be shared on the blog, which will also get sent to your inbox if you're subscribed to our newsletter. So you can also subscribe with an RSS reader if that interests you, but you can also use the newsletter like Kevin mentioned. So definitely do that if you want to keep up to date with all the updates, and there'll be links to every story and update that we mentioned during the stream. So yeah, we'll see you. Oh yes, also, we are a non-profit organization that is independent, and we rely on donations from our members and recurring payments from people. So if you do like what we're doing here and you want to support what we're doing so we can continue doing these live streams, as well as all the other work that we do, like blog posts, keeping the website up to date, video content, and all that, you can make a donation on the Privacy Guides website. So you can do that by going to https://privacyguides.org and clicking the red heart icon in the top right hand corner. That will take you to a page where you can either become a member or make a donation. You can make a donation by using either a credit card or a debit card, or you can also use cryptocurrency like Monero if you want to do so anonymously. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely check out the privacyguides.org website and make a donation. And with that being said, thank you all so much for watching this week. We will see you at the same time next week. Thanks so much for watching, everybody.
Bye, everyone.